Right?
Yeah. How important is Scotland's leadership on climate action?
Good question to start with. So, let me take the negative first. Many people would say, many skeptics would say, not at all important, because you know how many people are in the world? There's 7 billion, and we're only 5 million, so what does it matter? We're some tiny country at the edge of Europe, you know, there's nothing we can do. And that's completely wrong, actually. So, you know the idea of a symbol, there's something that might be small, but actually inspires? I'm a great believer, and that's what we could be. So when you're in the middle of really tough negotiations and everything looks difficult and maybe China are not playing their part in the way you want or Russia is misbehaving, to have someone like Scotland, I think, saying, oh, well, we're doing it and we accept our responsibility to do it and we accept that we've got a share in the problem, more than a share of the problems of people in the developing world, and we're doing something about it. Look at us. I think that's really, really important. It's not about size, it's about ambition, I think, and about vision. So I would say really important.
Thank you. Which are the most important sustainable development goals for Scotland?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. No, so some of them I think are not so important for us. Some of them are around sanitation and providing clean water and so on. I don't think they're so relevant to us. I think the ones that matter to us are climate change is a big one. Use of resources. So we all, for example, use as much resources as a small Indian village. So we're taking a far bigger share of our slice of the cake than we should be. If you took a map of the world, I've got this on a graphic somewhere, it's quite cool, and you show a map of the world, you press a button, and instead of being by geography, the size of the countries are replaced with how many resources they consume. We stop being a tiny little country and become a giant blob. And Africa shrinks down to some tiny amount. So I think resource consumption. And linked to that are some of the questions about food and other things. Because we're using so much of our share, all those things that are around climate change, water shortages, food, loss of biodiversity, these are all things that I think we're having a big... We don't realise it, we don't need to do it. We're taking too much of our share within the current generation. And my generation is stealing from yours by saying, actually, I know you wanted all that future development, I've used it up, sorry about that. So I think it's the ones that particularly where we're not taking our fair share, would be my view.
Thank you. How does your university measure your environmental footprint?
Lots of different ways, actually. So I'm director for something called social responsibility, so we try and place on ourselves, we put an obligation really to try and make sure that we have a positive contribution. And one aspect of that is our sustainability. So in practice what we'll do is we'll measure the energy use in our buildings and how much carbon that we're using. We'll measure how people move around the city and how much flying we do. We will measure how much waste we produce and whether that's being recycled or whether we can reuse it. We will measure how much water we produce. We'll do surveys of the plants and the animals and the insects that we have on the estate and whether we can make that a bit greener and more environmentally friendly. So lots of different ways actually. And the reason we do that is in some areas we're doing really well, in other areas it's more of a challenge. So it's good to have a set of targets that we could measure against and we can compare with other people.
Do you have any environmental accreditation? For example, ISO 14001.
So we don't, actually, and you might be wondering why. So we have one of these days I'm going to put it on the wall, we have a whole bunch of awards. So the National Union of Students gave us an award, we've had awards from what's called green gowns from the rest of the university sector. We haven't gone with what's called an environmental management system, because we didn't think at the time it would work for us, because we are pretty big, 500 buildings, 11,000 staff, 35,000 students, £200 million of annual spend. Often these environmental management systems can be quite complicated, so for the moment we haven't gone with one, but we have equivalents, if you like. So if you ask me how an individual aspect we're performing, we can tell you. If you want to know whether we're complying with environmental law, we can tell you. It is a good question, it's something that's on my mind.
Thank you. If COP21 is inconclusive, what will you do?
Well, I won't panic, and I think we heard how important government is, but government will only act when there's getting enough pressure and when their circumstances line up. So my view, it might sound cynical, but I'm not too worried about how strong the agreement is. It's a bit like, I don't know, this might sound rubbish. You know you've fallen out with your mate, And there's a point beyond which if you don't have some sort of process of keeping involved, you're no longer friends. It's just gone. So actually what you do is, while you're not yet ready to reconcile, you kind of keep in touch with each other in some way. You nod. You don't quite. That's what the talks are like. I mean, it's important for China and Russia and America and India to keep talking. At the moment, the deal they're going to get isn't going to be strong enough to turn to your generation and say, we did it, we solved the problem. But it keeps them talking. And that's important because it shows ambition again. Remember, going back to the question about Scotland? Scotland's doing something, maybe France will do something now. If France is doing something, maybe India says, I'll do a bit more. And the talks allow that process to keep going, and that's really important. At the same time, one thing I'd add is that people haven't noticed how, when I was growing up, I did a master's degree, and it was all about energy. And most of us wanted to talk about renewables. And the guy in charge was saying, why bother? Renewables have never been important in your lifetime. And what people don't realise, of course, the renewables are changing, as you probably know, all the time. And I think the stars are about to line up. And renewable energy, solar power, wind power, wave power, tidal power are about to become the future. And when that happens, you'll suddenly see a switch, and you'll suddenly see people piling into the solution, because this will be as much about energy security and about the cost of energy as it is about worrying about the climate itself. So I wouldn't worry too much. You know, you'll see the news. This is just my opinion. You'll see lots of people in despair. Don't worry too much, as long as that process is keeping going. I see signs of hope.
Well, thank you. That was really interesting.
No, thank you. Great questions. Pleasure. If I can help at all.